which has assessed whether that framework is still fit for purpose, given the new demands that we see coming from investors, but also given the new obligations that we ourselves have placed on investors. And clearly, if we are going to ask investors to disclose more information about how ESG factors are taken into account in their investment decisions and strategies, investors also need to have access to the necessary information to be able to discharge those obligations. And to cut a long story short, I think I can summarize our conclusion by saying that we've concluded our legal framework is no longer fit for purpose, and we need to review it. And indeed, there have already been some public announcements in that direction. The technical expert group has also worked on a number of other reports, such as the Green Bond Standards, to advise the Commission on how to create a voluntary, non-legislative EU Green Bond Standard. We are also asking the technical expert group to work on the link between the Green Bond Standard and the taxonomy to ensure consistency between the Green Bond Standard and other initiatives, such as an EU eco-label, which we're currently trying to establish for investment products. An eco-label is a well-known tool in the field of product environmental performance. We're now trying to spread that approach to the financial sector. We are fully aware that we can't work on this in isolation in Europe, because the challenges we're addressing are global and markets are global. So one of the streams that we have been working on is what we can refer to as a sort of sustainability diplomacy with third countries. And the way we have tried to do that is by establishing an international platform of sustainable finance, which has already met on a number of occasions, and where a number of countries from both developed and developing countries have already committed to join. The platform is not intended to produce normative documents, so no standards or rules per se, but to provide a forum for exchange of best practices and coordination in the field of sustainable finance. Because again, we fully recognize that we need to have a measure of consistency across jurisdictions, given the global nature of markets. The work that we have been doing on sustainable finance is by no means complete, and the new commission, which took up office on Sunday with President von der Leyen, has already announced that we will continue to develop a number of initiatives within the framework of what we in Europe call the European Green Deal. We don't call it the New Green Deal, just the European Green Deal, which President von der Leyen set out in her political guidelines a few months ago. So let me finish by very quickly going into a little bit more detail about the work that my team is doing. We're focusing on ESG disclosures, in particular for issuers. We adopted a piece of legislation, or the EU adopted a piece of legislation in 2014 called the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. We've had now two cycles of reporting following the implementation of this directive. And while that piece of legislation was groundbreaking at the time, as I mentioned before, our evaluation has shown that it has significant shortcomings. One of the key shortcomings, and it's been mentioned by Professor Whelan, is the lack of comparability of information that companies produce. If I compare the work that we're doing on sustainability disclosures to the other area of financial disclosures, clearly we are at very different stages of maturity. Indeed, I don't think we've even reached the stage of maturity in the area of sustainability disclosures that we had in the late 1990s, when the EU decided to adopt international financial reporting standards, because at that time it was pretty clear that international financial reporting standards were the standards to choose, and that's what we did in Europe. Today, I don't think we can point to a single standard in the field of ESG disclosures that is clearly the 800-pound gorilla in the market. There are very good standards addressing various aspects of ESG or sustainability disclosure out there. There's GRI, SASB, a number of others. But our feeling at this stage is that none of them are fully comprehensive. And we don't think we can just pick an existing standard off the shelf. Part of that also is linked to another aspect which is being raised by Professor William, which is the integration of financial and non-financial or sustainability disclosures. At the moment, there is still a lot of cultural change that needs to happen within issuers and finance departments, but also sustainability departments, which tend to work as separate silos. And we need to encourage them to work more closely together. So part of that may be because currently our legislation almost encourages sustainability reports to be issued separately from the mainstream annual reporting package. And that is maybe something we need to change to set the right incentives. But it goes far beyond that. And as I mentioned before, a key plank of our work on ESG disclosures is the double materiality perspective. The double materiality perspective, as I mentioned before, addresses both the dependencies that company performance has on external factors, but also the impacts that companies have on the outside world. There are feedbacks between these two. Clearly, if a company trashes the environment, sooner or later that is going to lead to either reputational risks or even legal risks, which will feed into its financial performance. And so we need to address these in an integrated manner. We've noticed that in the US, despite the short-term, difficult, perhaps, political context, there have been some interesting developments. The House has, in the Finance Committee, Financial Services Committee, has considered an ESG Disclosure Simplification Act, which I think responds to some of the same, or attempts to respond to some of the same challenges that we have identified in Europe. As I said, whatever the short-term political context may be, none of us can ignore the challenge of climate change, environmental degradation, and the related social challenges. Well, I can't turn this off now. There we go. Anyway. As I mentioned, we're fully conscious that we need to address this in a joined-up manner internationally. There are many fora in which we can do this. Our international platform on sustainable finance is one, and that international platform on sustainable finance needs to work very closely with a number of other fora, such as the network of central banks working on green finance also. And because markets are global, we need to also talk to each other to ensure that any standards or legislation that we put in place are compatible across legislation, across jurisdictions. And I'll close by saying that because the fates of our countries, our economies, and our peoples are inextricably linked, we hope very much that these are matters on which both the private sector and the public sector and the administration in the US will be able to join in, and our hand is open and reaches out to you to do that. So thank you very much.